For more on this, we can cross to Dublin and bring in Barry Colfer, Director of Research at the Institute of International and European Affairs. Barry, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
My pleasure.
Now, as we heard in that report there, the role of president is largely ceremonial. As a figurehead, how important is the role of the Irish president?
Thank you very much. The role of the president is certainly still important. So you correctly say it's a largely ceremonial role, but there are some really important constitutional functions as well. In terms of this president, it's going to be a tough act to follow, as your package displayed there, that President Higgins is leaving office with an approval rating in the 70s, which is almost unheard of. And this is because he's really filled the role of the president, as you correctly say, as kind of expressing the spirit of the nation, or as I like to say, exhibiting the conscience of the people. So the role of the president is still really important because it kind of captures that public sentiment.
Now, Barry, I understand this was a sort of a tough campaign. There were some attacks on the candidates. Can you tell us more about where Catherine Connolly and Heather Humphreys stand and their views?
For sure. Just to preface that quickly, this was, of course, a tough campaign. Every political campaign is, but it was an unusual one because we only had two candidates in the race. So typically in the last two presidential elections, we had 6 and 7 candidates respectively, going back to 2018 and 2011 for a number of reasons, including one very high profile candidate having to drop out of the race quite early on after being involved in a controversy that was Fianna Fáil's Jim Gavin. You just ended up with these two candidates, and you can just see from the performance of the candidates, I could say, over the past couple of days, it's been an exhausting month because so much attention has been focused on them. And what it really boils down to, I think, and this is an interesting thing to take away from this election, Ireland has never had this left-right cleavage that most of the European countries have had until this election. So never in Irish history have you had two candidates, one that is demonstrably of the left and one that is demonstrably of the right. And you heard in your piece how these candidates have clashed over things pertaining to international affairs, and Heather Humphreys having to stand over government policy. So what you've seen is loads of attention on the candidates because there's only two of them. Usually the attention had to be spread amongst the multiple candidates. And also you really see this kind of consolidation of this left unity candidate, Catherine Connolly, and this more establishment government candidate, Heather Humphreys. But I should just say in conclusion that actually Fine Gael, which is the party of Heather Humphreys, it's correct to describe them as one of our parties of government. It's one of only two parties that have ever led the government. But Fine Gael has never held the presidency, so it's a prize the party wants dearly. But it looks like it might be a tough one for Heather Humphreys in this election, given the polling data that you've already mentioned.
Now, to go back to that, so Humphreys and Connolly, how are they perceived by the public? Because obviously it's the Irish public that's going to decide who ends up as the next president.
Yeah. All politics everywhere is local, but in Ireland, politics is very local. It's a fairly small country, and just the nature of our political discourse, candidates need to be very familiar with the public. It's fair to say both candidates, I think, are widely liked. Catherine Connolly is seen as a continuity candidate from our outgoing president, Michael D. Higgins, who, as has been well documented, is really widely liked. And Catherine Connolly is into many of the same things that Michael D is about. She's a beautiful speaker of the Irish language. She's very attached to important matters of international affairs. So Catherine Connolly is popular for those reasons. Heather Humphreys then she came to this the candidature at a little bit of a disadvantage as well, it should be said, because the likely candidate, Mairead McGuinness, former MEP and European Commissioner, had to step away for personal reasons. So Heather Humphreys came to the debate fairly late. And I think people gave her a little bit of slack because of that she came in, kind of late on in the day. She's a really good communicator, but she says this herself. She's really good one-on-one, but under the glare of cameras and in studio, she can sometimes struggle a little bit. And I think this has really been borne out over this campaign. So they're both popular people. And I think the previous point I mentioned about Catherine Connolly essentially being a candidate of the opposition and Heather Humphreys being a candidate of the government is the kind of clearest hallmark of how the election has been run.
Now, Barry, you said when you consider the role of the president that it's sort of the conscience of the country. So when the public is going to the polls today and they're, deciding, are they voting for someone who reflects the government and its policies or someone quite different? Are they like you, considering it as the conscience of the country?
I think it's fair to say the presidency is an important election, but it is regarded as a second order election. So people, when they go to the polling stations to vote, I think will tend to have a different set of calculations than if you're voting for the government. The president will speak about things of enormous importance to the public, things around international affairs, things around housing, things around Irish unity. I could go on. But the public know that the president has very limited executive powers, but they just express this conscience, this spirit, this view of the people. So I think when people go to elect or to choose their preferred candidate, they'll be thinking about someone who might express their wishes, their views in a really general sense, rather than when you're voting in your home place, in your town, in your village, in your county, where you're talking about how the government might perform. So actually, I think the approach people will take is quite different. And this is reflected in the sorts of presidents we've had, by the way. This is going to be our 10th president. We know that there will be a woman because there's only two female candidates. We will have had three women and seven men. And you've seen over the course of history, from Mary Robinson in 1990s onwards, you see this candidate who kind of is almost above politics and speaks about these matters of spirit and matters of conscience that you referred to.
Now, Barry, you touched on earlier the current president, Michael D. Higgins. He's served the max, his two terms, those 14 years, and I understand he's quite beloved in Ireland. So, how has he shaped the Irish presidency and changed expectations for that role?
Michael D. Higgins is indeed really popular. He was a government minister as well, serving with the Irish Labour Party. He was, I would argue, a continuity candidate from the two previous people that we had in the Oris, which is the home of the Irish president. I mentioned Mary Robinson, but also her successor, Mary McAleese, who kind of broke this mold before these three most recent presidents. The president filled a more kind of they tended to be an elder statesman from one of the big parties, or almost exclusively, I should say, from the Fianna Fáil party. Michael D has really challenged the limits of the presidency with respect to what he has said about government. He has been very outspoken about matters of social policy and especially matters of international affairs, but also one of the great challenges of our time in Europe and elsewhere around housing. So Michael D has really confirmed, I think, that the president is able to challenge government when it comes to these big matters of policy. And the expectation is that whoever the next president is, that they would probably continue to do that, speaking up on, you've heard President Connolly, oh my goodness, candidate Connolly speaking about Palestine, for example. Michael D. Higgins was very outspoken when it came to that topic. And I expect whoever is in the Oris, whether it is Catherine Connolly or Heather Humphreys, that they would continue to do that, especially on foreign affairs.
Barry, thank you so much for joining us today, talking all things Irish politics. That's Barry Colfer, Director of Research at the Institute of International and European Affairs. Turning now